There's a story of a young person who grows up in order to discover they have extraordinary powers, extraordinary allies, and this young person then liberates others, leads them to freedom. And this is the story of so many other people, including Moses, because it's a trope, right? It is, I took a course actually at Michigan State with a professor from Bar-Ilan University who spoke of fairy tale tropes. It was a course, of course, in Jewish literature, and said that when you look at the story of Moses, when you look at the story of Joseph, you see in them the same, there's a birth scene generally, not always, but generally, or no one's quite sure about the birth, and then you have a scene that skips. There's almost never a story of any childhood, and the next scene you see is when they're adults, and there's usually some sort of conflict. They then flee and leave for a bit before they come back triumphant and do whatever liberation needs liberating, right? This is also, of course, the plot to the Star Wars movies. Right? Some say that episode 7 was just an echo of episode 4. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, I apologize. And that's okay. If you haven't seen the movies, then that's not okay. But what can we do? The cantor says he doesn't understand it. I feel the same way with most musical modes, so it's okay. So I will say I'm going to try not to give any spoilers for those that have not seen The Last Jedi. But I will allude to things, and I apologize if you feel that spoils it in any way. If you would like to step outside for the next 6 minutes and then come back, you have my permission to do so. I know you've seen it already, so you can't. I will say the reason we're discussing Star Wars this morning is because we'll get to the parasha in a bit, but because there's been much literature, it does relate. Don't worry. It already related with Moses. We already have the tie-in. No, but it relates because of something that flows in all of us and unites in every living creature and every living thing, and that is, of course, God. The Force. And there are different explanations for the Force in the different trilogies. And there was a polemic against Reform Judaism written recently, titled Reform Jediism. I believe it was published in Tablet, I believe, that by an author who's often polemical against Reform Judaism, so it was nothing out of the ordinary, other than it sparked a conversation in many forums in the online Jewish world about Reform Judaism and the Force. So this is, of course, something we need to discuss this morning because it is the most pressing, relevant topic in Judaism today, outside of the two-state versus one-state solution, all that stuff going on that we will focus on in future Shabbat mornings. But this morning we'll focus on the question of the Force. And this is a important question because you'll remember, because I assume everyone here has seen episode 4, that episode 4, A New Hope, is about a farmer. A little farming boy who suddenly, without any yichus, without a last name that you hear and recognize and know exactly what it means, without parentage, in fact, that's the great mystery, this boy saves the universe because he has access to something deeper inside the universe. It's only an episode I think it's episode 6, where we learn that he does have, with Luke, is it 5? I don't know, I thought you were, that's fine. I'm not an expert in these things, I'm just an amateur who enjoys. But where, of course, the line, Luke, I am your father. Hopefully that's not a spoiler for anyone. That we find out that Luke is Anakin Skywalker's son, and Leia Skywalker, and that there's actually a family which is important, that your family you come from, that certain families are chosen in different ways, have different access to God, to prophecy, than others, right? In the first, in what is the second trilogy, but what are the first 3 episodes of Star Wars, you get a scientific explanation that it runs in the blood. That there are these things called midichlorians, and it's really not worth getting into, but that the Force and access to the Force actually is genetic and runs in the blood. In the new trilogy, we have a counter story, a counter proposal. And that is that someone with no lineage, with no special parentage, nothing, not yet at least, but I bet they'll stay far away from it as well in this, no special blood, has access to the Force. And in fact, not only this person, but also maybe even a clone, maybe even a little boy working in a stable, all can have access to this great life force of the universe. Reformed Jediism. Right? And that is the claim. It is, I will say, the polemic against Reformed Judaism comes specifically in a conversation around holy books, but that is a spoiler, and I'm not going to give that to you now. But there is something about blood and inheritance, which is a debate in Judaism, as well as a debate amongst fans of the Star Wars trilogies, right? How does this tie to the parasha today? In 2 ways. One is in the first words of the parasha, Ele Shemot B'nai Israel. These are the names of the family who went down to Egypt. They are 70 in number. Here are the names of the family. Because the book of Genesis is a narrative about a family. It is parents and children and sibling drama. And when we get to the book of Shemot, the Jewish family turns into the Jewish people. Right? We change from a narrative about parents and children to the narrative of a people enslaved in Egypt, a people that has grown. These traditions still remain, the names still remain, the Shabbat, the circumcision, these things we keep. But Moses, of course, goes out and marries a high priest of another religion's child, and they have circumcision on the way back into the land of Israel, our parasha, right? And eventually, when we leave the land of Egypt, we leave with a mixed multitude that also hear the words from Sinai, and therefore we would assume also become part of our people. That it is not just a family narrative, but the narrative of something greater, something different. We'll leave what that is until later in the sermon, but just to flag for the moment that we have a narrative of a family versus a narrative of a people bound by Sinai, a people bound by covenant. In the second way this ties into our Torah portion is a special scene which happens at a bush, which happens to be a flame, right? So this bush, the word for bush is a strange word, and it is sneh, right, which is not a common word in the Torah for bush. I believe this is the only time it appears. And the commentators point out Sneh and Sinai and Sinai are related. And was this revelation a miniature version of the revelation at Sinai? It is a revelation which actually tells the whole story inside of it and what's going on with just that name. But Moses is able to access that revelation because he is Well, there's different answers, right? Is it because it's the Force? He's a Jedi? No, because Yoda. No, it is because he is. Is it because he's Jewish? Is it because he is a child, as it says later in the Revelation, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all of the women as well? Is it because he is paying attention and aware? If you were to look at the writings of Judah Halevi, you will see in the Kuzari that revelation is only accessible to those with the right bloodline. That revelation is only accessible to Jews. And he actually does talk about blood when he's talking about Judaism. If you are to read Maimonides, who comes later, for him, revelation is available to the observant. Revelation is available to those who are able to see in the world that which is beyond the world, who are able to trust in God, to interrogate scientifically, and to them we have revelation. And so, in our parashah, in our tradition, we see this question come up as to what makes us Jews. What makes us Jewish? What is it that gives us access or the ability to access in a Jewish way the force which surrounds and is part of all of us and the universe? And we see that there's different answers given inside of our tradition, inside of our trilogies, up until this moment. So I'm going to propose to you a couple of frameworks that people use to think about this and what makes a Jew in the modern day. One is from Abraham Insfeld, who was the head of Hillel International for many years, who is famous for what used to be the three-legged stool, but has, upon Googling this past week, turned into the five-legged table. What does he mean when he talked about the three-legged stool? He would say Jewish identity, being a Jew, is something that needs support. And if you were to have a two-legged stool, it's not going to work, says our carpenter in residence. That two-legged stools don't work. You need to have three legs in place in order to have a stool which is able to stand, to have people that are able to maintain their Jewish identity. And for him, the stools, he now has 5 supports, which you need to have 3 of in order to be a Jew, in order to have that identity. They are memory, Jewish memory, 2, Jewish family, connection to Jewish family. Number 3, covenant, that feeling of responsibility or ought. Number 4, Hebrew, the language of Hebrew itself. And number 5, a connection with the land of Israel. Right? So that is memory, family, covenant, Hebrew, and the land of Israel. I believe the 3 were covenant, Hebrew, and Israel, and then he added on later family, memory. Right? So, the way that he would use this is in talking about Jewish identity in university students working for Hillel International and the importance of Israel as a component for that identity. But if you look at this list, you can say there are many people who are not Jewish who fit into this list. If you live in the land of Israel and are not Jewish, you have Hebrew in Israel, and you probably have a family, right? And you can look at this list, and of course he means it in a very specific way. The way that he would talk about Hebrew is he would talk about teaching in religious school and have kids say to him, "Why are we learning this? Does God only speak Hebrew?" And he'd have to explain that, of course, no, but it's just a way we connect into our understanding of God and into heritage, right? But if we look at his list, we find some sort of recipe for what it might mean for us to be Jewish, to teach Judaism in the future, some of which, some components for some of us, are about family and inheritance. Others we need to claim for ourselves, right? There is room in his conception for Jews by choice, who can find their own connection to covenant, who can find their own connection to memory and constructed memory and the Passover story, and can find their own connection to Hebrew in the land of Israel. And these things are easier if you're born into a Jewish household, right? Some of which, I will say, are currently under real threat to our 20s and 30s. When we talk about Israel, for many of us, the Zionist conversation comes easy. I recently got an email from a member of the congregation who said, "Why are we doing something supported by the World Zionist Organization? Isn't Zionism a dirty world and a dirty word in the world that we live in today?" Only for me to, of course, explain that we are an actively Zionist community, and we interpret Zionism as a state of Israel that is more ideal than the current state of Israel is, if that's politically said enough, right? So that is Abraham Instell's conception. Another conception of what does it mean to be Jewish that we have today actually comes from the Soviet Union and Marxism, and it's an idea of a national minority. So this was actually the focus of one of my final undergraduate seminars, was looking at the way that different cultures treated minorities, and in the communist countries they had a criteria for what made a national minority, and the Jews were almost always excluded from this arithmetic, right? So the different ingredients included a shared language, which Jews kind of fail, right? Because if the candidate was to speak to us in Hebrew, a number of us would understand, but many would not. If he was to try, Ladino or Yiddish or German, right? Or English would work for almost all of us here, but not for the Jews that come from. I was just talking with someone in my office the other day who says, "My father's Israeli. He's been in Israel since, or my family's been in Israel since the 1800s, and my father doesn't speak English," right? There is not a shared language. We try to create one for ourselves, but there isn't a shared language. What about a shared land? At this time, of course, Jews lived in many lands, and very few Jews lived in the land of Israel, and a shared culture, right? So what does it mean for us to have a shared culture? And this is something which we've worked hard on in the diaspora, because, of course, under culture comes, in Mordechai Kaplan's mind, religion as well, or civilization. What does it mean to be part of a united civilization? Does it include Israeli dance, which is really Eastern European dance, right? What makes our civilization, our culture? Is it Jewish music? We, of course, heard the beautiful Sephardic melody, and which for many of us felt very foreign. And no one knew how to come in on the responsive part that the whole congregation is supposed to sing with, right? And And with our heteropy, with our different voices singing the same thing at the same time, all slightly off key, right? We didn't do it as it's supposed to be done. And so what does it mean to say we share a Jewish culture as well? So, in the modern Reform movement, there still is a fight over what it means to be a Jew. In that, when we read responsa for the Central Conference of American Rabbis, we do still, in this congregation, have Judaism through the blood, right? Specifically not through the blood, if you're specific, but Judaism through the womb, right? That a baby born in a Jewish womb is a Jew. In the United Kingdom, the liberal movement, they say it has nothing to do with what womb a child is carried in. There are many that were raised in Jewish wombs that were never put in any sort of Jewish education. And rather, maybe what's happening when you say that, what you really mean is it's the education in the home. And so in the liberal movement in England, if you are raised in a Jewish home, or if you take Judaism on for yourself at any point in your life, you are Jewish, right? And there's a purposeful rejection of the idea of Judaism being something which flows from parents to children simply because of the midichlorian in the blood, which lets us control, right? But simply because of the fact of Jewish womb itself, but rather children are raised by their parents because their parents have hopes and expectations for them. People join the people of Israel because they share the message. They share the mission of liberation, not just for ourselves, but for all the people who joined us on the path out of Egypt, not just for ourselves, but for everyone in the world. And so, this is the conception of Judaism that I think is coming in the positive way from this newest trilogy in the Star Wars saga. And that is not the story of a family, but a story of a people like the book of Exodus discusses. A people that some people are born into, but then raised in the good side of the force, right? Some people are raised to look out for others and to have that relationship with Judaism. And other people follow along on that path towards liberation, that path out from Egypt towards Mount Sinai, and join us not because of the accident of birth, but because of the calling of the Spirit on a journey with a mission, and not a journey for the journey's sake alone, towards a better world, a promised land, a land where all are free and none are oppressed, where all are able to find warmth. Right? One specific way I'll say that we see this mission come to life in this season is through our Art of the Cold programs, making sure that warmth and light are brought to those who are otherwise out in the cold. And on a coming Shabbat evening, January 19th, I believe it is. Is that a Friday night? I think so. Yes, good. January 19th, I can definitely say. Our congregation's pairing with the Miles and Dahl JCC and hosting a dinner for anyone in the Jewish community and outside as well who doesn't normally have access to a nice dinner on Friday nights. So with the grant from Mazon, we are going with our mission and reaching out to those that don't normally have access to Judaism, to Shabbat, to a nice meal. Via Hafta will be cooking the meal in our kitchens, and then we'll be serving it following our Friday night service. And if you would like to volunteer on that evening, please feel free to come and talk to me, and I will get you the information for how to volunteer and help actually bring warmth to those who are out in the cold. So, I hope that all of us hear the mission of our people, that it flows in our spirit, and for some, maybe if it works for you, in your blood, or I'll say all of us really, in our blood. And in Star Wars, they say, of course, may the Force be with you. But the Force we really know is the living presence in the universe. And so may this Shabbat and may the eternal be with you now and always. Shabbat Shalom.